came back from a 50-point deficit in the polls. And last night, we began the political revolution, not just in Iowa, not just in New Hampshire, but all over this country.
Welcome to Franc Analysis and Hear Me Out podcast. My name is Franco. And what you just saw there was Bernie Sanders celebrating a very close race between him and Hillary Clinton after the results of the Iowa primaries back in 2016. Now, Bernie Sanders said that that's the beginning of a revolution. And he brought that up several times. Are you ready for a revolution? It's time for a revolution. The American people want a revolution. Bernie Sanders would say this all the time in 2016. He even named the organization that Nina Turner is now leading, which is Our Revolution. He has a book that's called Our Revolution. But unfortunately, Bernie Sanders doesn't seem to behave like he actually wants a revolution. Now, a revolution, according to the dictionary, is a forcible overthrow of a government or social order in favor of a new system. Now, Bernie Sanders was very adamant about implementing Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, a Green New Deal. Even though the Green New Deal that AOC was proposing had its problems in that it doesn't ban fracking. Bernie Sanders was bringing it to the forefront that we have to do something yesterday about climate change, that we have 12 years left to do something about climate change before the effects become irreversible. He talked about taxing the rich, the millionaires and the billionaires, and putting money back into the pockets of the American people. Now, the title of this video asks the question, is Bernie Sanders the biggest disappointment of 2020? Now, in my personal opinion, I do believe Bernie Sanders was the biggest disappointment in 2020 because there was so much promise in the beginning of 2020. Him filling up stadiums, breaking records with contributions from individual people, him leading in the polls, or just being right behind Biden, which Biden had just name recognition because he was the vice president of Barack Obama. And seeing not just Bernie Sanders, but we saw with Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang that they had a big following too. And that Bernie Sanders could have garnered their support. We could have coalesced and had such a massive movement to fight the establishment and actually have a revolution. But that revolution did not happen. Now, in 2016, Bernie Sanders opened the eyes of many people, including myself, about the systemic problems of our country. I myself didn't care about politics prior to 2016. I thought that the Democrats had everything handled and that it was the Republicans that were resisting any changes that helped the people and that things are just very complicated. Well, Bernie Sanders opened my eyes into realizing that the systemic problems of our country is that Democrats actually do not want to change things to help the people because the Democrats get paid by the same people that pay the Republicans. And I remember a big criticism people had about Obama, and a big reason for why people believed why we couldn't get the things we want done is because Barack Obama would capitulate way too much with the Republicans, and the Republicans would resist way too much with any changes. Barack Obama would come to the negotiating table with the compromise rather than the deal that he actually wanted. Well, it turns out that the deal Barack Obama actually would want was the compromise, seeing as how he's also bought out by Wall Street, the pharmaceutical industry, and many other lobbyists. And so Barack Obama never truly wanted these changes, much like how Hillary Clinton never truly wanted any changes that would benefit the American people. She was only in it to help herself and the lobbyists who pay her money. And the same is true for Joe Biden. For years, he's profited off of this system. He represents the corporations who pay him. I mean, it's only logical. If you receive more money from corporations than you do from the people, who are you more likely to serve? And so what Bernie Sanders is doing now is that he's capitulating with the corporate Democrats, much like how Barack Obama would capitulate with the Republicans. Therefore, any sense of progress would just be tweaks around the edges, and corporations would actually get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's something that I call incremental regressivism, because though we see some social policies, some improvements with social policies, the economic policies exacerbate more and more every year. So Bernie Sanders had a task force. I'm sure a lot of you guys have already heard of it, but if you haven't, Bernie Sanders formed a force with Joe Biden's campaign, in which Bernie Sanders had representatives and Biden had his representatives negotiate what policies to propose to help people if Biden were to become elected. And the results of that task force was pretty much nothing that Bernie Sanders was running on. We didn't get Medicare for all. We didn't get a Green New Deal. We didn't even get the very popular defunding the police that several Americans are chanting and protesting out in the streets. I was already disappointed enough when the way that Bernie Sanders ran his campaign, and him capitulating with the establishment by voting for the CARES Act, which was the biggest transfer of wealth in history. So now here's Bernie Sanders gaslighting to the American people and to his supporters about the accomplishments of this task force, which were actually nothing. And here's what he had to say.
Effort to come up with a compromise. And I think the compromise that they came up with, if implemented, will make Biden the most progressive president since FDR. It did not have, needless to say, everything that I wanted, didn't have everything that Biden wanted, but there is no question that on some of the major issues facing this country, if that agenda is implemented, life will improve with tens and tens of millions of working people. It'll improve for our environment and for climate change, criminal justice, and for the needs of low-income people.
So the key that Bernie Sanders was saying there was if it's implemented. Now, the only reason why there even was a task force was because prior to the primaries, Bernie Sanders was breaking records. He was receiving millions of donations from people, from working class people. He had the biggest grassroots movement that's been ever seen. And the Biden campaign and the Democratic establishment knew that they needed the support of these grassroots donors if they were to win against Donald Trump in November. But the thing is, once you get elected into office, and if you have more money that you receive from corporations than you did for the people, and you weren't promising these people anything significant that would benefit their lives, you give up all leverage once you vote for them. Joe Biden doesn't have to, and Joe Biden doesn't want to implement any progressive policies. In some cases, his policies are even worse than what Hillary Clinton was offering, and that he's going to lower the age of Medicare to a range that's 10 years older than what Hillary Clinton was proposing. Joe Biden is bought off by the fossil fuel industry. He's bought off by the pharmaceutical industry, so he's not going to give us Medicare for all. Joe Biden's not going to ban fracking. And Bernie Sanders is revealing to us more and more each day that he's not the fighter, he's not the leader that we envisioned him to be back in 2016. That's a lesson we need to remember here. When it comes to political figures, we don't have a 100% accurate depiction of who they really are. We have an idea of what they are. They can show us through their actions that they're going to fight for us, and I'm always thankful that Bernie Sanders brought to light a lot of these issues, a lot of these systemic problems that are affecting us, and that this generated a big awakening in a lot of people, and even in people who already understood what the systemic problems were. They realized that they weren't alone, and that now they have more people that are aware of what's going on. Now there's people that are making the argument that they trust Bernie Sanders because he's been working in politics for years, and that they trust his methods of working within the system. Bernie Sanders is doing what is best for his survival. So that's what has been clouding his whole perception of what is best for him to do. His strategy. His strategy is to not be shamed by those in his social circle. Because to him, that's his survival. He cares a lot about his reputation. What you do for your survival is going to be completely different. Because this strategy of incrementalism, where has that gotten us? For decades, the corporations have gotten bigger and bigger. So your strategy for implementing changes in this country should be different than Bernie's strategy, because Bernie's strategy has to do with his survival. So the lesson that many people should take away from Bernie Sanders in 2020 is that don't just sit and wait and expect people to come out and do things for you. The only way you're going to get the changes that you want, the only way that you will have yourself saved, is if you save yourself. Thanks for watching that segment of Hear Me Out. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell down below so you can get the latest on sports, pop culture, and progressive politics. Stay informed.